A while ago on the channel, I actually uploaded a video discussing why I thought most, if not all, starter Pokemon end up being bad and competitive. It's one thing to just say they're bad though, and it's another to actually put my money where my mouth is and to see if, as a competitive Pokemon player, I can try and fix the starter Pokemon. For some quick criteria, we're only going to fix the irrelevant starters, which for the sake of this video, I'm going to classify as any starter Pokemon that does not have a 1% usage rate on Pikalytics for the Regulation F format. Even having gone through these stats though, we somehow only managed to get 2 starters, being Rillaboom and Incineroar, that make this exception. If you enjoyed today's video at any point in time though, consider leaving a like and subscribing for more, as we upload tons of competitive Pokemon content like this. And with that said, let's get right into our Kanto starters. Starting off with Kanto, let's talk about Venusaur. Venusaur almost has the perfect toolkit, and it really just needs a simple buff to its speed. With an extra 10 points to its speed, it would have plenty of speed to outrun options like Iron Bundle with just the Sun up, which honestly gives Venusaur plenty of things to work with. Meanwhile, Charizard and Blastoise are going to take a bit more than this. I think giving Charizard a Dragon typing would honestly be a really good start, as its primary flying stab move Hurricane is hindered by the Sun and all of its other options are significantly weaker. With a Dragon typing though, this has a lot of better defensive benefits as well with the Sun, such as losing a little bit of its weakness to Rock and becoming neutral to Electric and Water, which is a pretty big deal. While you would gain a newfound weakness to ground type Pokemon, this shouldn't be the biggest deal as there aren't a lot of great ground types in the current format. Speaking of ground types though, let's give this thing the move Earth Power, giving it some really strong ground coverage to combat a lot of the other fire types that might potentially take advantage of your Sun. Finally, we're gonna give Charizard Draco Meteor so that way then it can have a little bit more powerful of a Dragon Stab than just Dragon Pulse here. Moving into Blastoise though, we do have a few buffs that should hopefully help this thing a lot. For starters, we're gonna give it back the move Follow Me, as this was a pretty decent move for it in Generation 8 that offered Blastoise to become a niche option in the format, especially with this Gigantamax form. While it does lack this new form, I think Follow Me would help a lot, but we're going to need to go a bit further here, as that wasn't really the big reason you were using Blastoise anyway. It was just helpful. I think a secondary typing of Steel would be a nice benefit to Blastoise, and considering it is probably still the weakest starter of the bunch, let's also give it an extra 5 points in each of its defensive stats to match the buff that we just gave Venusaur. While this leaves Charizard without a stat increase, I'd argue even after this, it probably has the most efficient stats of the 3, and a Dragon Fire typing is also pretty insane anyway, as we've already seen through this generation. And moving on to the Johto region, we do have a lot of work to do here. Starting with Meganium, we need a whole rework. An added Fairy typing and the new hidden ability of Triage would give Meganium a huge leg up on the other starters. We're also going to give this Draining Kiss, Floral Healing, and Dazzling Gleam to give us some usable stab and also a really valuable support move with Triage. While this does steal a lot of purpose from Comfey, you would be trading a better defensive typing and also a better stat spread for giving up Comfey's speed control such as Trick Room and Tailwind, and also the move Taunt. Despite these better stats though, I do want to also give Meganium the same 10 stat point buff that we give to Venusaur, but this time to its special offense. So Meganium's special attack now is going to go up to 93, which isn't the best, but when you pair that with +3 priority, it is doable. For Typhlosion, let's change out its hidden ability from Flash Fire to Flame Body here. So other than Typhlosion can attempt to punish opposing Fake Out users that are stopping a Choice Scarf Eruption. We're also going to opt to give Typhlosion Earth Power as well. Just like with Charizard, the coverage will help a lot, and especially in Typhlosion, the coverage is really lacking. Finally, we're going to move 10 from its attack to its speed, so then it finally has a little bit of a different stat spread than Charizard, giving it enough speed to outpace a lot of common Pokemon around that 105 mark, such as Mienshao and then Garchomp, which is slightly slower. Finally, for Feraligatr, we're going to end up giving this a pretty big rework, since this is arguably the hardest one to make work in doubles. I'm thinking for starters, let's give this a Dragon typing and also change out its ability from Sheer Force to Tough Claws. While Sheer Force is a pretty powerful option that we will be touching on later, I think Feraligatr does benefit a bit more from Tough Claws here. This allows Liquidation to potentially get a physical defense drop on the opponent while also potentially boosting Aqua Jet, making it a lot more beneficial as a really good cleaner option here. Let's rework the stats a bit though, because Feraligatr does not have the best use of its stats. I'm thinking we move 20 from its special attack to its speed in an effort to make this be essentially a faster Dragon Hit sweeper that could potentially be the Rain counterpart to an option like Gouging Fire. Moving into Hoenn, we have a lot more interesting spread of starters. Starting off with Sceptile, I think it is already pretty close to viability, but it is missing a couple key traits. Let's start off by giving Sceptile the Dragon typing, just like its Mega had. I promise we're almost done slapping Dragon typing onto starters to make them good, but the Mega had this typing already, so I think it's kind of thematic. We're also going to give Sceptile Draco Meteor though, so that then in tandem with Leaf Storm, you have 2 different options that could in theory take advantage of White Herb plus Unburden, making this a lot more powerful of an option. I also think we need to trim its attack by 20 in order to give its special attack a bit of a bump, as it's kind of weak off offensively, especially for such a glass cannon. For Blaziken, we really don't need to give this Pokemon much, and I think similar to Sceptile, it is pretty close to the mark. I think adding Fake Out here, as well as moving 10 from its HP to speed, gives this Pokemon a lot more notoriety as an incredible user of Fake Out plus speed boost. With its mixed offenses, you're gonna have a pretty difficult time of taking on Blaziken once it gets a single Fake Out off, and this could also become a pretty unpredictable Pokemon, especially on the in-game ladder. Finally, let's get into Swampert, which, while the Mega Form leaned into a much faster spread, focusing on Swift Swim, I actually think that base Swampert will probably benefit a bit more from a speed nerf. I think if we move 20 from its speed and split that among its defenses, Swampert could actually be a pretty cool Trick Room option that pressures a lot of different Trick Room threats like Kingambit and the Ursalunas significantly more efficiently. Also, let's give this thing a real ability and drop Damp in favor of Thick Fat, which will make up for its neutrality to ice while also making it a lot better against fire types. The Sinnoh region is going to be a bit weird to handle. Two of our starters actually just got pretty massive buffs, and they're still honestly pretty terrible. Looking at the Pikalytic stats, the highest use for any Sinnoh starter is currently at Empoleon, with a 0.08% usage, and that's after it got access to so many new moves. With that said, let's start with Torterra, which has a lot that we're going to be working with. We're going to change the ability from Shell Armor to Solid Rock, which should give it a huge edge in its defensive prowess here. While Shell Smash was a great option for Torterra as far as singles goes, in doubles this doesn't offer a lot. So we're actually going to be looking for a speed reduction to give this thing a potential Trick Room niche similar to Swampert. Just like with Swampert, let's gut 20 from its speed in order to give this system more useful stats. Unlike Swampert though, we're going to be actually giving Torterra a 30-point stat boost instead of the 20 we just reduced from speed, as just like with our other grass starters being Meganium and Venusaur, Torterra only has 525 BST to work with, so I want to try and get all the starters up to at least 530 here. So we're going to be giving each of its special stats a nice boost of 15 points, which should make Torterra a pretty good mixed offensive and defensive tank in Trick Room. Moving on to Infernape, let's get rid of Iron Fist, because this is actually a pretty weak ability, and I think we should just give it Inner Focus to avoid being weak to Intimidate. We've already seen this be huge wonders for Mienshao, and Infernape has almost the same utility besides the lack of Wide Guard here, but you would gain a lot of other moves that Mienshao does lack. With a secondary stab, as well as options such as Helping Hand, Coaching, Knockoff, Encore, and Will-O-Wisp, to name a very select few moves that Infernape could utilize, I think it might actually be able to find a place with just a better ability. Finally, Empoleon definitely needs a few things. I'm going to start by giving Empoleon back the move Scald, as well as adding on Muddy Water and Body Press to its moveset, in order to allow Empoleon to utilize a set that's pretty similar to options like Registeel that already have notoriety. With a moveset featuring Roost, Iron Defense, Body Press, and either Scald or Muddy Water, Empoleon would actually be a pretty annoying Pokemon to take on competitive. And don't even think about trying to drop its stats to make it easier to KO, because that's just going to activate its ability competitive, making it even more potent offensively here. Going over Unova starters, these easily need the biggest buffs in the whole dex, or at minimum, Samurott and Emboar do. Superior is actually going to be pretty simple, thankfully, as all we really need to do to make it viable is give it a Dragon Stab, as well as the move Draco Meteor. With both Leaf Storm and Draco Meteor to boost Contrary, it would easily become not only a viable Pokemon, but probably one of the best starters anyway. It's already a top 5 option in VGC, which should say a lot, so I really have no doubt in my mind that this would actually make Superior really good. Just for good measure, I think we should give it a +7 boost to its speed, in order to outpace the likes of Roaring Moon if they're not going to go for booster speed. I'm going to be boosting all the Unova starters by 7 points, by the way, as just like with our 525 grass starters, I want to make sure that everything is hitting at least 530, if not higher, so we're going to be boosting Emboar and Samurott by this 7-point amount as well. Moving on to Emboar, this is going to be rather tricky, and I think we're going to need to emulate the Swampert and Torterra approach by gutting its speed. We're going to go a lot more drastic here though, due to the fact that Emboar is an offensive fire type competing with Torkoal, so we're actually going to remove 35 base speed from Emboar, making sure that it could tie the likes of Amoonguss in Trick Room. We're going to boost each of its defenses by 21 points, bringing both of them up to a stat point of 86. Considering Emboar already has a really incredible ability with Reckless, as well as coverage options like Head Smash and Wild Charge, this could be a pretty cool Trick Room threat just with a little bit of added bulk and a slower speed set, so I don't really think the offense needed any boosting here. Now as for Samurott, that's definitely a different story. With Samurott, this might honestly be the worst starter Pokemon we're reworking today, as at least a lot of the others had potential, but I think Samurott's going to be tricky. I think a pretty cool idea could be giving us the water and rock typing, as there's a lot of different moves that we could add to Samurott's move pool that would be really valuable rock stab to it, such as Rock Slide, Mighty Cleave, and Rock Blast. We're also going to give this Pokemon Sharpness in order to match the Hisuian form, as I think this should hopefully help with moves like Mighty Cleave being really spammable stab options. We're also going to remove 28 points from special attack, and in tandem with our +7 buff for all the Unova starters, we'll be adding on 13 to its attack and 22 points of speed, making this at least have some form of a niche option as a choice scarf of Pokemon that can at least perfectly speed creep Jollyland or Asteria. Now, unlike our starters from Black and White, the Generation 6 starters actually give us a lot to work with, and I feel like these are all pretty close to being viable. Despite its horrible usage rate, we've actually seen Chestnut pop off recently in VGC during Regulation F towards the end of the format, and I think this Belly Drum moveset gives us a great idea of what we're working with here. Considering this set is already pretty good for it, I think the perfect buff would honestly just be to change out Chestnut's hidden ability for Unburden. Its stats already prove to be pretty cool for it, and considering its best set revolves around forcing away its item anyway, I think you could probably just partner this with a Pokemon like Clefairy and deal some serious damage. As for Delphox, I think the first buff is going to be easily giving us the Fire and Fairy typing instead of Fire and Psychic, as Psychic really isn't that good right now with all the Dark types. We're also going to give this thing Moonblast as a strong single target Fairy Stab, as it already has Dazzling Gleam to work with. Let's also take 10 away from its attack and move this towards speed, and change its useless ability from Magician to something like Magic Guard, giving Life Orb sets a pretty strong reason to be used. Greninja's going to be a pretty easy one though, and no, we're not going to either make Battle Bond legal or look into revising Protean, as I don't think either of these alone will actually be enough to make Greninja use. I think Battle Bond is at least the right start, but we're going to need a bit more here, and I think the main thing that will help Greninja a lot is the reintroduction of Map Block, as well as the ability for Greninja to gain access to Muddy Water as a means of safely targeting both opponents. By having this spread option that targets just the enemy, this is a pretty easy way to potentially proc Battle Bond, allowing it to actually be a terrifying sweeper. Finally though, we're going to move 10 away from its attack in order to boost the special offense a bit more, making Greninja into a finally usable glass cannon that can lean towards its better offense anyway. Generation 7 is finally here, and considering we only have 2 options that are already pretty okay, we don't really need to do much here. We're going to start off with Primarina, as this is a really simple one. Let's just make Liquid Voice function like Pixelate finally, and that really is all it needs. Primarina is already the 3rd most used starter, and it just barely made the cutoff for ignoring the list today, so I really don't think it needs anything else. It's already borderline a viable Pokemon. As for Decidueye, yikes. This needs a lot here. We're going to get creative and gut a massive 40 points from a special defense in order to boost the speed. With this dual stab combination, we could honestly make it a pretty interesting mixed attacker here, as this has a lot of communities to things like Fighting, Normal, and Rage Powder and Spore. While neither offense is relatively strong, the typing as well as its well-rounded stats offensively speaking could help Decidueye at least get a little bit more useful, considering it would have a lot of advantage with the 110 speed set. Moving on to the Galar region, we yet again only have 2 starters, starting off with Cinderace. Now honestly, Cinderace is pretty tricky, since it already has a really good stat line and it just needs a move pool buff. But that gets kind of dicey thanks to Libero. I don't even know if the move pool would fix Cinderace, as Meowscarada is essentially just a better version of this, and realistically, it doesn't even need the ability Protean to begin with anyway, due to the fact that it just prefers the pre-Protean typing. I think if we gave Cinderace at least Rock Slide and Wild Charge, this would be a start, and I think if you settled for using it on like a Choice Scarf set, for example, you could use Stab Rock Slide to flinch out opponents, as well as options like Wild Charge, Pyro Ball, and High Jump Kick to fix matchups. As for Inteleon though, this one gets even more dicey, because I kind of think that we either need to completely ignore the fact that this is a monotype starter trio, or we need to give it something so absurd that it might be a bit much. So bear with me here, as we're going to be changing Inteleon's hidden ability from Sniper to Water Bubble. Now this is actually a really big deal, and for anyone who's ever used an Araquanid on their team, they'll know this is a deadly ability. So to try and hopefully remedy this, we're actually going to take away 10 points from a special attack to move this over to attack. Now this serves 2 purposes. A, it actually makes Aqua Jet a little bit more usable, especially as a good priority option to revenge kill, but also B, it will hopefully help avoid certain key KOs that were guaranteed with the 125. I will say this is probably going to be the most extreme buff in the video today, but I really cannot underestimate how terrible I think Inteleon would be with literally any other change within reason. With 2 regions left, let's move on to the Hisui region. We have 3 pretty unimpressive starters here, starting off with Hisui and Decidueye. Now Hisui and Decidueye honestly just needs a 30-point speed cut. Just like with Emboar, we're going to aim for the speed tie into Amoonguss, and we're going to give 15 points to each of its defenses. As for Hisui type Lotion, I want to change the ability to Sheer Force. I did mention this would come into play later, and I think Hisui type Lotion is kind of the perfect candidate for it, as it's not as overbearing as something like Delphox, and it actually is a really good move pool to take advantage of this. Now Frisk can be useful, but with tournament play switching to Open Team Sheet, this is a truly useless ability unless you're playing on the in-game ladder. I think we're also going to give Hisui type Lotion speed back another 5 points by taking 5 out of its attack, so we can get back to 100 base speed here. Finally, going to Hisui and Samurott, this is going to be a pretty interesting one. I'm honestly shocked that at minimum during Regulation D, this mod didn't actually pop up a bit, so we're going to really need to do a lot here because this currently has a 0% usage. I think it's mostly due to the fact that we have a lot of other dark types right now, so we need to do a lot to make this Pokemon actually stand out. I think if we gut its special attack by a base 20 point, we can actually make this thing pretty relevant speed-wise, bringing this all the way to 105. We're also going to boost the physical attack by 7 points in order to match the same BST we gave the Unova form, giving us now 115 base physical attack. Finally, as minor as this might sound, I want to actually look into giving us Play Rough. As with Play Rough as well as its Dark and Water stabs, this actually has perfect neutral coverage against every single Pokemon in the game. I don't know if this will fix it, but frankly, if this doesn't at least get it some usage, I really don't know what else to do for this. Samurott just kind of sucks. Finally, we have our Paldean starters, and these I actually have to be really careful with, because 2 of them get out of hand very quickly, and the third still has a lot of potential. Starting off with Meowscarada, I think this one actually doesn't need a lot because it already had a lot of viability early on, but it fell out of favor mostly due to options like the Paradox Pokemon that could outpace it. This could honestly be remedied just by changing the hidden ability to Technician and giving it Fake Out, as this would now have Technician boosted Fake Out and Triple Axle to take advantage of, and I think it could even opt to use a move like Grassy Glide if you didn't care about Flower Trick, as this could still deal serious damage even if terrain was inactive. Skeletors are honestly debated leaving off the list despite its low usage, due to the fact this has a lot of potential already in the current format. With Unaware, Slack Off, and Will-O-Wisp, this more suffers from being a defensively oriented Pokemon rather than not being viable enough, because a lot of teams just don't really skew for defensive Pokemon that aren't Amoonguss. I think we'll kind of just keep this at a 15-point speed reduction in order to at least slot this between options like King Gambit outside of Trick Room and just barely underpacing Blood Moon, so then you have a Trick Room advantage against it. Finally, for Quaquaval, we're going to give this thing a new typing in order to help it stand out a bit more from Urshifu Rapid, which is just one of the best Pokemon of all time, excluding the restricted legendaries. I think with the Water Flying typing, this helps a lot with its matchups into Pokemon like Amoonguss here, and it really does force the Terra at that point. You already have moves like Brave Bird and Acrobatics, which would really benefit Quaquaval a ton here. And if we also move 20 base special attack all the way over to its speed, giving it a base 105 speed stat, this actually helps a lot considering its ability Moxie is really terrifying as a cleaner, and Aqua Step now becomes significantly more potent against most common Choice Scarf options, or even a lot of the non-booster speed Pokemon. So what did you guys think of all the buffs for the starters? If you enjoyed this video at any point in time, leave a like on the video and subscribe for more, and comment down below what your favorite buffs to the starters were. I'd love to hear you guys' suggestions as well for starter buffs. Some of these were pretty hard to do, so I'm curious if anyone has any better ideas. Also, consider becoming a member, as for just a couple dollars a month, it goes a long way to supporting content, and it helps me continue to pay the editors who make wonderful videos for you guys every week. Our current editor for the long form content, Kurt, edited the video you guys are seeing today, and if you enjoyed that, it would be a great way to support him the extra mile. Meanwhile, if you want to support our short form content editor, Becca, she also does a lot of the short form content that most likely brought a lot of you guys to this channel, so I highly recommend you guys check her out as well. With that said, I will see you guys next week for another video. Until then, peace out, guys.